Greetings and welcome to our HillCrest Wine Notes for the Wine Club. This is the last shipment of the 21-22 season here at the beginning of May 2022. And over the summer here, of course, we don't ship anything when it's warmer, but we'll begin again in September as well. So to finish up with, we have super classic wines, varieties, however you want to look at them. We have a 2016 vintage Alta, which is a wine that we make in the Mosel Valley of Germany. Many of you are familiar with. 16 super classic vintage off of a vineyard called Klusterother Bruderschaft. And that wine is drinking beautifully now. It's got a few years on it, and it's just really, there's great precision within it. We've got a Cabernet Franc 2017. We'll talk a little bit about that, but that's a brand new release of the Nonich, which is a perennial favorite. And then we'll finish up with a Sangiovese di Romagna, which is Sangiovese from an area outside Chianti that I thought would be really interesting to present and show you kind of a different twist on something that we know. So anyway, without further ado, we'll get started tasting. Cabernet Franc, one of the classic great varieties of the world, what are called the 7 classics, 4 of which are red, 3 white varieties. Famous in Bordeaux, of course, but also famous in the Loire Valley west of Paris, and that's where the appellation Chinon is, and Chinon reversed is Nonich, so that's where the name Nonich comes from. But the Loire tends to make a little bit of kind of herbaceous, kind of floral, higher acid style, even some rosés, some super beautiful rosés from Cabernet Franc around the world. But as you drop down into Bordeaux, it tends to be, it has a little bit less acid and tannin, so it's a little bit softer, more feminine, but tends to be very aromatic, and it really is a very powerful blender in terms of what it does. But this is 2017, and we were just recently at the Astoria Wine Show, and a lot of wines are being poured, red wines that were 2020, 2021. And so here, this is kind of, it speaks to doing things in a very different way and kind of listening to the classic ways. So anyway, 100% Cabernet Franc, and we'll take her for a spin. It's interesting, sometimes when you smell wines, you'll smell, one thing and you'll smell something else. It's almost like the wines are layered in that. And this wine really hits me, a lot of things kind of intertwined together, and I think part of that is the age, that in time and barrel, it really kind of, you get this beautiful kind of reddish black fruit, almost like a rose, like a dusted rose petal character. You get a little bit of sweetness of wood and a little bit of what the French call sous-bois, which is turning that log over in the forest and smelling that sweet undergrowth. It's the wine comes out, but it doesn't hit you. And this is, I think that Cabernet Franc is so feminine. It's such an incredibly elegant and beautiful wine to drink. And it's something that really, when we came here, we really didn't have a lot of intention of doing anything along those lines. Malbec was, something we really wanted to do. It's turned into an absolute stunner for the area. Cabernet Sauvignon, we had the Phenom vineyard. Now we have some other vineyards planted to Cabernet. But Cabernet Franc is something, it's a wine that really is an incredible drinker, and also a magic in variety and blending. When I was down at Mondavi and that, if you looked at a lot of the vineyards that produce high quality Cabernet in Oakville and Rutherford, they would always put a little bit of Cabernet Franc in, and it's a little bit of, like, you think when you blend, like 1% of something would make a 1% change. Sometimes you can put 1% of something and it makes a 50% change. And that's the case with Cabernet Franc. It tends to pop the aromatics. It tends to kind of make the Cabernet Sauvignon a little bit finer. But something that we found is a lot of the most age-worthy Cabernet Sauvignons always had a little bit of Cabernet Franc, and there's some kind of pixie dust in that I can't tell you what that is. But anyway, let's have a taste. Very long, the fruit is just kind of dissipating, but very feminine. The wine comes in, it's very creamy, and in a way almost Pinot-esque. Kind of, it gently opens up. The wine has that architecture. It opens up, but it's still fairly deep. I mean, you get the intensity of the Cabernet family, not necessarily the power. I would reserve that for Cabernet Sauvignon and Malbec and that. But beautiful kind of volume, very gently. You can feel the wine kind of open up and almost like turning the dial up on a stereo or something, that volume. Finishes up some tannin, much less tannin than Cabernet Sauvignon, but still there. And now I get these beautiful wood notes. There's a kind of a sweet, almost like a cedar balsam character to it, and a little bit of like sweetness of wood, almost like clovey almost. There's a little bit of like a spice character to it, but super beautiful. Drinks really fine. And the nice thing about a wine like this is Cabernet Sauvignon, especially if you drink it young, you have to have something of that scale and that mass to kind of balance it out. Cabernet Franc is something that allows you a lot more leeway. You can really kind of move into more delicate foods. Maybe even a piece of chicken with like just a really light kind of brothy sauce almost. I mean, it's really, it's very, very fine. And the way people go from white to red and sweet to dry, they also go from power to elegance. And this is something I find myself reaching for more and more, where you want something that has flavor, but something that's gentle so it doesn't overwhelm the palate. But super beautiful. Enjoy that. 2017, once again. So that's 4 years in barrel, unheard of. Old George de la Tour BV Private Reserve. When I got into business, those wines were all 3.5 years in barrel. This kind of has some of that character, those old classic Napa Valley Cabernets. For our international release, Kiara Candelo is a young lady who has taken an area that is super famous for food and for wines at one time. That's kind of, she's putting it back on the radar, but that's the area of Emilia Romagna. And if you look at northern Italy, there's a valley that goes from the west to the east and empties out into the Adriatic. And at the very bottom of that, in the hills, is Emilia Romagna, which they say is the stomach of Italy. The food there is absolutely stunning. Parmesan Reggiano is produced there. What else? Balsamic vinegar comes from there. But I mean, it's just it just drips with great food. And Susan and I had the opportunity the last time we were there, I think it was 2019, to visit a dairy making Parmesan Reggiano, and watching the old ladies flip the wheels of cheese and the liquid, and that it was like almost marinated in once the rolls were being prepared, or the wheels being prepared for export. But the wines are, it's a little bit warmer than Chianti. So we know Sangiovese is the base for Chianti. It's grown throughout Italy. But Sangiovese Romagna is a different clone in a slightly warmer area, different soils. So if you look at Sangiovese, we know Sangiovese from Tuscany, Toscana, but that's one form of Sangiovese, or many forms, different clones, as we'd say, or selections genetically. Brunello di Montalcino, that our last wine club wine, the Pazzo Collina Sangiovese Reserva, that's a Brunello clone that are smaller berried selection with more tannin, so much more powerful and rich, and Brunello di Montalcino is famous for that. Sangiovese Emilia Romagna is something that is much more kind of round, soft. It's a little bit warmer as you move. The Adriatic is a warm body of water, so unlike where we move to the water, it cools it down there, it warms up a little bit. But you have these rolling hills, and this young lady has taken, she makes a very classic style wine. This wine has a little bit of carbonic fermentation, or whole cluster that she dumps in the tank, ferments the wine, but then it's aged in Slovenian boti, the big cask, like the cask that we have here. So you don't see a real strong, pronounced wood influence on the wine, but very fine, beautiful to drink, but kind of a different twist than what we'd see out of Tuscany. So Tuscany tends to have more nerve, more acid, more tannin typically, but we'll taste this. And I've tasted it before, and it's pretty nice, so I'll revisit the wine. Two things hit me. One is the red fruit. Sangiovese has at times almost like a kind of cherry jello character to it, this real bright focus. There's an area called Beredenga within Tuscany that has that. This kind of hits me that way, but makes you salivate, kind of that tartness of fruit a little bit. The other thing you smell is you smell the sun. The sun takes fruit with wines and it makes them kind of very almost round and pleasant, and it kind of comes up out of the glass at you, and this has definitely that character. So where Chianti Classico, the traditional wines, come across the palate, definitely Sangiovese, some nerve, acid, some tannins. But this wine really kind of opens up a lot more, has a sweetness and a roundness and a softness to it that's very, very beautiful. The tannins of Sangiovese are very different. This is like those very mealy tannins that you get in like orange rind, almost like a slight hint of bitterness in a very pleasant way, where you peel an orange, you leave that little bit of white rind on there, and you bite into it, and you get that character. But very, very, I'd say generous, where Chianti Classico is oftentimes hard to drink on its own because of that nerve, and that this wine has just a kiss of that, but is yet soft, that this would be a beautiful wine to sit outside, have by itself. I'll have with a little bit of cheese in that as well. It's still a food wine. It's just that it's softer, more generous, but What's interesting about this is that it's really, you see the essence of Sangiovese in this, and one of the different faces of Sangiovese. Once again, this has very little winemaking as we would know it, in terms of like new wood, this kind of character on it. But roughly about 1 year in the Botti and the bigger barrels and that, which is pretty typical. Oftentimes in the old days it was, you know, many, many years, but in today's world, 1 year would be more typical. So anyway, with that, we'd like to say thank you for your support. Today we're just starting to get into some bud break and that. We've had a little bit of rain this spring, but we're looking forward to classic vintage here in 2022. So to the genie in the bottle, cheers.